welcome the anointed ones. Be careful who you ask about me, because the truth might embarrass you more than it defends me. That's the kind of energy surrounding your name right now. See, there's a fascinating psychological fact. People who set out to gather negative evidence about someone almost always reveal more about their own bitterness than the person they're investigating. It's called confirmation bias. The human brain hunts for proof of what it wants to believe. But here's the twist. When they went digging for complaints about you, they didn't find dirt. They found gardens. Instead of whispers of scandal, they ran into consistent testimonies of respect, honor, and admiration. And that's when the suspense cracked open. They thought they were exposing you, but what they actually exposed was themselves. Imagine expecting to collect insults only to get hit with a highlight reel of your best qualities. Awkward, right? They were ready to nod along as people dragged your name through the mud, but every voice they consulted polished your crown instead. By the fifth, "Oh, they're amazing. I've never had an issue with them," you know they started feeling like they were sitting in the wrong meeting. It's almost funny when you think about it. They walked into the room like prosecutors and walked out like unpaid publicists for your character. They were hoping for skeletons in your closet, but all they got was neatly folded laundry. And now, they're stuck with the sting of realization. The problem was never you. It was their need for you to be someone you're not, so they could justify their resentment. But reality doesn't bend to envy. It bends to truth. And right now, the truth is this. Everyone they asked had nothing but praise for you. And the only ones looking foolish are the people who thought otherwise. Number 1. Their interrogation turned into your confirmation. They thought they were clever when they started asking around about you. In their minds, this was going to be the moment everything came crashing down. They were expecting to uncover a hidden flaw, a secret mistake, or someone who had been waiting for the chance to expose you. They wanted confirmation that the stories they had built about you were true. But what they didn't expect was that every person they asked would confirm something completely different. Instead of dirt, they kept receiving praise. Instead of accusations, they heard testimonies about your kindness, your integrity, and the way you carry yourself. That's when their interrogation turned into your confirmation. What was supposed to be an investigation designed to break you ended up being the stage that validated you. They weren't looking for truth, they were looking for evidence to support their lies. But truth has a way of standing on its own. People didn't have to invent anything in your defense, they simply spoke the reality they knew, and it was undeniable. The most painful part for them wasn't that people spoke highly of you. It was that it was so consistent. It wasn't one or two people offering polite words. It was a pattern they couldn't ignore. Every answer matched the last, painting a picture of someone steady, trustworthy, and genuine. That's when they started realizing they had miscalculated. The strength of your character wasn't just a personal thing. It had become common knowledge. And there's nothing harder to fight than a reputation that's been built on years of truth. You didn't have to defend yourself. You didn't have to show up, argue, or try to win anyone over. Others did it for you, because your life had already spoken for itself long before anyone tried to put it on trial. And that's the part that cut them the deepest. They wanted to be the ones holding the gavel, declaring you guilty in the court of public opinion. But the more they pushed, the more they highlighted just how innocent you really were. So their attempt backfired. The interrogation they thought would damage you only elevated you. What was meant to weaken your name ended up stamping it with credibility. They wanted to expose you, but all they did was confirm what you've been all along. Real, consistent, and unshakably true to yourself. Number 2, praise became their silent punishment. They didn't expect the praise to hurt, but it did. When they went around asking about you, they were hoping for complaints, whispers of negativity, or at least some hidden bitterness from someone in your past. They were confident that somewhere, someone would echo their own narrative about you being the problem. But instead, every response was positive, every recollection carried respect, and every person they asked had nothing but good things to say. That praise was supposed to reassure them, but it didn't. It cornered them. It punished them without a word being directed at them. That's the sting of truth. They wanted you condemned and instead you were celebrated. Praise can feel like light, but to someone who hates you, it burns. They had been feeding themselves the idea that others secretly thought the same way they did about you. They told themselves that if they just asked around, their suspicions would be confirmed. But all the praise they gathered left them with no defense. And in that moment, they had to confront something painful. Their dislike of you isn't shared. It's personal. It's rooted in their own jealousy, and they're the ones carrying the problem. The very thing they were seeking became their undoing. Each compliment about your character cut deeper because it highlighted the emptiness in theirs. They had to sit with the reality that you are not only respected but loved, and that others value what they could never diminish. That wasn't just uncomfortable, it was humiliating. It left them looking foolish because it proved that their attempts to discredit you weren't grounded in truth, but in envy. And what makes it worse is that you didn't have to say a word. You didn't have to fight back or gather people to defend you. The people they questioned did it naturally, without prompting, because that's the kind of imprint you left on them. The authenticity of the praise made it undeniable. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't exaggerated, it was simply what people knew to be true about you. So the praise itself became their punishment. Not because you demanded it, but because they walked straight into it. They set the trap for you, and it snapped back on them. Every kind word spoken about you was a reminder that they were wrong, that they had misjudged, and that the person they tried to paint as the problem was the very one others honored. Number 3, the absence of dirt revealed their own. The absence of dirt on your name did more damage to them than any direct confrontation ever could. They were so sure that if they asked the right questions, pressed the right people, or dug deep enough, they would find something to use against you. They wanted proof of hypocrisy, some old mistake, or even the slightest trace of double standards. But every door they knocked on left them empty-handed. There was nothing to collect, no gossip to cling to, no scandal to parade. That silence didn't protect you, it exposed them. The more they searched and came up with nothing, the more obvious it became that the problem wasn't you at all. Their frustration wasn't that they couldn't find flaws, it was that their obsession with finding them revealed their true intentions. They weren't after truth, they were after destruction. And the more their efforts failed, the clearer it became that the darkness they were looking for was actually inside them. That's the power of living consistently. Your life didn't give them the ammunition they wanted. You weren't perfect, but you were genuine. You weren't flawless, but you were solid. You lived in such a way that even those who didn't particularly like you had nothing substantial to say against you. So their mission to dig up dirt only highlighted their envy and their need to tear down what they couldn't match. They thought the absence of flaws would frustrate you, but it frustrated them instead. At some point, they had to face the embarrassment of realizing that their failure to find evidence wasn't accidental. It was inevitable. They wanted others to confirm their negative view of you, but what people saw was a different story. The very fact that they were searching so hard became suspicious to others. It made people wonder why they were so intent on ruining someone who had such a clean reputation. Their obsession raised more eyebrows than your actions ever did. So in the end, their search backfired. What they couldn't find spoke louder than anything they hoped to expose. The absence of dirt wasn't a gap to be filled. It was a reflection of your strength of character. And while they were left looking petty and desperate, you stood taller, untouched, and even more validated by the failure of their hunt. Number 4. They realized you're not just liked, you're trusted. When they started hearing what others had to say about you, it wasn't just flattering remarks or casual compliments that came up. It was something much deeper. People didn't simply say you were nice or easy to get along with. They spoke with conviction, almost like they were protecting your name in your absence. That's when the realization hit them. You weren't just liked, you were trusted. And that's a completely different league. Being liked can be surface level. It can be based on charm, appearance, or temporary impressions. But trust is forged over time, through consistency, through moments where your actions matched your words, and where your character stayed the same whether people were watching or not. That kind of reputation doesn't come from talking about yourself. It comes from how others experienced you in the quiet, ordinary moments where no spotlight was on. And when those same people spoke up on your behalf, they weren't exaggerating. They were testifying. That's the part your enemies didn't calculate. They thought people's opinions of you were shallow enough to be swayed by gossip or poisoned by suggestion. They thought if they dropped a few doubts, others would quickly latch on. But instead, they encountered something unshakable. People weren't just fond of you, they relied on your character, and they had evidence from their own experiences to prove it. They couldn't be convinced otherwise because they knew too much of the real you. And here's the sting. The people who tried to smear you don't have that level of trust in their own lives. They may have followers, they may even have people who laugh with them, but when it comes down to genuine trust, who would vouch for them if someone questioned their character? Who would speak with confidence about their integrity? That silence is what separates them from you. So when the reports came back, they weren't hearing flimsy praise. They were hearing a collective testimony that you are solid, dependable, and authentic. And that kind of respect can't be purchased, manipulated, or faked. It's the result of years of being true to yourself. They wanted you discredited, but instead they stumbled into the kind of credibility they could never manufacture for themselves. Number 5. Their script fell apart in public. They had the whole storyline laid out in their minds. You were supposed to be the villain, the one everyone secretly disliked but hadn't spoken up about yet. They rehearsed it, they believed it, and they were confident that when they finally started spreading that version of you, people would nod in agreement and confirm their narrative. But when they put it to the test, something unexpected happened. The responses didn't align with the script. Instead of agreement, they were met with confusion. Instead of bitterness, they were met with admiration. Every person they asked gave feedback that completely shattered the tale they were trying to tell. That's when their carefully built script fell apart in public. The story they had been holding on to wasn't just wrong, it was exposed as fiction. People didn't just fail to back them up, they actively contradicted them. They said the opposite of what was expected, offering examples of your integrity, your consistency, and the positive impact you had on their lives. And because it was so consistent, it was impossible to dismiss. It wasn't a matter of opinion anymore. It was a matter of fact that your character stood on solid ground. The humiliation wasn't just in being wrong, but in being revealed. They weren't exposed as someone with a simple misunderstanding. They were exposed as manipulators who tried to force a narrative that didn't exist. That's a hard pill to swallow because once people see that, it doesn't just damage their credibility, it destroys it. When someone is caught pushing a false story, every other word they speak becomes questionable. And the truth is, they miscalculated from the start. They thought your reputation was fragile enough to be rewritten by gossip. They underestimated how much goodwill you had built over time, how many people had already witnessed your consistency, and how deep your influence actually runs. They assumed you were easy to slander, but what they didn't realize is that when a person has lived in truth, their story writes itself, and no one can rewrite it. So when their script collapsed, it didn't just leave them looking foolish, it left you standing taller. They became the exposed storytellers caught in their own lies while you walked away with your authenticity confirmed, not by your own defense, but by the undeniable voices of others. Number 6. The weight of consensus crushed their lies. What truly broke them wasn't just that people spoke well of you, but that everyone did. One person saying good things could have been brushed off as favoritism, loyalty, or bias. They could have convinced themselves that maybe a few people were just defending you out of pity or attachment. But when every voice echoed the same truth, when the pattern was consistent across different people from different times and places in your life, it became something they couldn't argue against. That's when the weight of consensus crushed their lies. They were banking on division. They assumed that if they dug around enough, they'd find at least one person willing to air out some negativity. someone who might have held a grudge or an old wound they could exploit. But when the testimony kept coming back in your favor, it left them cornered. It wasn't one person here and there. It was a chorus of agreement. People weren't hesitant, they weren't vague, they were firm. They vouched for you with clarity and conviction, and every word made it harder for the false narrative to survive. The shame grew heavier with each affirmation of your character. With every person who vouched for your integrity, they were reminded of the fact that their version of you existed only in their imagination. The more people spoke, the less ground they had to stand on. Their story didn't just fall apart, it was suffocated by the sheer force of truth being repeated over and over again. And that's where the exposure cut deepest. It wasn't just that they were wrong about you, it was that everyone else knew it too. Their credibility dissolved in real time, because when the collective verdict is unanimous, the one holding the lie becomes the odd one out. They weren't just revealed as bitter or envious, they were revealed as completely disconnected from reality. That's the difference between a rumor and a reputation. A rumor is fragile, relying on whispers and doubt. A reputation, when built on years of integrity, becomes a wall too strong to topple. And when they tried to go against that wall, the force of consensus crushed them under the weight of undeniable truth. Number 7. They wanted a weak spot, but found only strength. They thought they'd hit gold when they went digging for your flaws. They were convinced that if they searched long enough, they'd uncover something ugly, an old mistake, a scandal, or a weakness they could exploit. That's what fueled them, the hope that behind your calm presence and your steady character, there had to be cracks waiting to be exposed. But as they pressed deeper, what they actually found was the opposite. Instead of hidden skeletons, they discovered a trail of resilience, kindness, and wisdom. The very areas they expected to find weakness were the same areas that testified to your strength. This realization broke their confidence because it meant their entire mission had been built on a false assumption. They wanted you to be like them, messy, bitter, and secretly corrupt. But the evidence didn't align. People spoke about how you handled adversity, not with pettiness, but with endurance. They recalled how you treated others, not with arrogance, but with compassion. They brought up lessons they had learned from you, wisdom that had helped them, and moments when you showed up with integrity, even when no one was watching. Every attempt to pull your reputation down only lifted you higher. The strength they encountered wasn't loud or showy. It was proven through years of consistency. And that made it even harder for them to accept. Weakness can be faked into strength, but genuine strength can never be fabricated. They realized you had something they couldn't copy, something they couldn't counterfeit. The ability to remain whole under pressure and unshaken in storms. That's a strength that comes from within, and it's the kind they'll never embody because it requires truth, discipline, and humility, qualities they've avoided their entire lives. What they thought would be your downfall became a mirror of their own lack. The more they searched for weakness in you, the more they had to face the reality of their own. And the truth is, they weren't just frustrated because you had no scandals. They were frustrated because your strength reminded them of their failure to grow. It left them exposed, envious, and painfully aware that the very qualities they wanted to use against you are the same qualities they'll never have the courage to cultivate in themselves. Number 8. Their questioning was the real exposure. Their plan seemed simple enough. Ask around, plant a few seeds of doubt, and wait for the responses to confirm the narrative they had already created about you. But what they didn't anticipate was how their very questions would make people suspicious. Not of you, but of them. Instead of collecting dirt, they drew attention to their own obsession. The more they probed, the more others began to wonder why they were so invested in tearing you down in the first place. That's where their scheme unraveled. People weren't answering their questions with negativity about you. They were answering with curiosity about the person doing the questioning. The tone of their inquiries revealed envy, bitterness, and a hidden agenda. It became obvious they weren't motivated by truth, but by resentment. And once people noticed that, the conversation shifted. You weren't the one under scrutiny anymore. They were. The spotlight they tried to shine on you swung back onto them. Their words, their tone, even their persistence betrayed something darker than concern. It exposed their jealousy and their desperation to see you fall. People who might have stayed neutral suddenly saw the manipulative pattern. This wasn't about you making mistakes. This was about them needing you to be the villain so their own insecurities could feel justified. That's the irony of it all. By trying so hard to damage your reputation, they ended up damaging their own. Their questions made it clear that they were hunting for something that didn't exist, and that made others lose respect for them. Instead of hearing scandal about you, people saw immaturity in them. Instead of gathering support, they created suspicion. Instead of proving their point, they exposed their motives. And that's the part they can't undo. You didn't have to lift a finger. You didn't have to defend yourself or argue. Their own words became the trap that caught them. Every attempt to discredit you revealed more about their envy, their bitterness, and their inability to let you be who you are without trying to diminish it. In the end, their questioning wasn't your exposure. It was theirs, and everyone could see it. Number 9. They encountered your invisible reputation. What caught them off guard wasn't just that people spoke well of you, but that the respect was already deeply rooted before they even started asking questions. They assumed reputations were fragile, that one rumor or one piece of gossip could rewrite how others saw you. But what they ran into was something they weren't prepared for: your invisible reputation. It had been walking ahead of you for years, shaping people's perceptions long before they came along with their smear campaign. That kind of reputation isn't built overnight. It's the result of countless interactions where your character showed itself, where you proved your consistency, and where you left people with a lasting impression of who you are. By the time they tried to launch their attacks, people already had a library of experiences with you stored in their memory. And those experiences didn't match the narrative your enemies wanted to push. They quickly discovered that trying to dismantle a reputation like yours is like trying to argue against history. It can't be erased. The respect people had for you wasn't shallow or conditional. It was steady and well-earned. It had been tested by time, proven through challenges, and reinforced by the way you carried yourself in situations both big and small. That's why the attacks bounced off so easily. You weren't being judged on isolated stories. They were being measured against years of evidence that already spoke on your behalf. What frustrated them most was the realization that your reputation was immune to sudden attacks. It wasn't something they could tear down with a few words or a few planted doubts. People had already made up their minds about you, and that decision was based on truth, not hearsay. The more they tried to attack, the more they highlighted just how unshakable your standing really was. That invisible reputation, your history of integrity, your consistent character, and your quiet impact on others, stood in the room before you ever did. And when they tried to fight against it, they weren't battling rumors. They were battling something far stronger: the collective memory of everyone who had ever seen you walk in truth. And against that, they didn't stand a chance. Number 10. They learned popularity isn't the same as honor. What unsettled them most was realizing the difference between the kind of attention they're used to and the kind of recognition you carry. They may have the numbers, the noise, and the crowd that claps when it's convenient, but what you have is something far rarer: honor. And the truth is, popularity and honor aren't the same thing. Popularity can be manipulated, bought, and even faked through influence or image. Honor, on the other hand, is earned quietly, often without you even trying, and it's rooted in how you consistently show up in people's lives. When others spoke about you, they didn't just compliment you in passing. They spoke with weight. They weren't caught up in the surface-level admiration that fades when the trend shifts. They were acknowledging your character, your reliability, and your spirit. That's the type of praise that lasts, the type that doesn't vanish when gossip appears or when circumstances change. And that's what frustrated your enemies. They couldn't compete with the depth of respect you've earned. Crowds are fickle. They can cheer today and boo tomorrow. Popularity is fragile. It rises and falls with the moment. But honor has staying power. It doesn't disappear when rumors spread. It stands firm because it's been built on truth. That's why their attempts to discredit you didn't stick. They were throwing accusations at someone who had already been sealed with the trust and respect of others, and nothing they said could rewrite that. This realization was a mirror they didn't want to face. They may have more followers, more attention, and more noise surrounding them. But when it comes to the question of who people would vouch for in a heartbeat, your name rises. And that's what they'll never be able to buy. Honor doesn't come from how many people are watching you. It comes from how many people would defend you when you're not in the room. That's the difference that silenced them. They expected shallow approval to crumble under pressure, but what they encountered was deep acknowledgement of your integrity. They were reminded that while popularity is loud, honor is powerful. And in the end, it's honor that outlasts every rumor, every attack, and every attempt to rewrite your story. Number 11. Their manipulation backfired into admiration. They thought they were clever when they started whispering your name in the wrong way, convinced that the more they spread negativity, the more people would doubt you. But life has a strange way of flipping schemes upside down. What they didn't realize is that the moment they started talking about you, they were giving you free publicity, and instead of scandal traveling, what actually spread was admiration. The very act of trying to ruin you only magnified the truth about who you really are. Every time they brought your name up, people responded with stories of your kindness, your resilience, and your integrity. They were hoping others would join in on the slander, but what they created was a stage for people to highlight your best qualities. Without meaning to, they turned your life into a testimony that kept getting repeated. What was supposed to be your downfall became your advertisement. This is the irony they can't escape. Their manipulation didn't shrink you, it amplified you. They ended up introducing your name to circles you might never have reached on your own. But instead of hearing the lies, those new ears heard the truth, and the respect for you only grew stronger. They imagined your reputation would sink under the weight of rumor, but instead the opposite happened. It rose higher, reinforced by the loyalty of those who truly knew you. And here's the sting. They became your promoters without being paid, without being asked, and without even realizing it. Every attempt to assassinate your character turned into a marketing campaign for your authenticity. They wanted your name to be associated with scandal. But now when your name comes up, it's tied to strength, dignity, and honor. What they set in motion was beyond their control. Once people saw how consistent the respect for you was, they stopped listening to the lies and started questioning the motives behind them. And just like that, the spotlight shifted. You didn't just survive the smear campaign. You thrived because of it. In trying to destroy you, they spread your legacy wider, and now the admiration they unlocked can't be taken back. They lost, not because they failed to lie, but because their lies only revealed more of your truth. Number 12. They were forced to face your imprint on others. What silenced them the most wasn't the general praise, it was the depth of it. When they asked about you, people didn't just offer shallow compliments or polite words. They went further. They began to recall specific moments, situations, and personal experiences where you left a mark on their lives. Each response wasn't just an opinion, it was a memory, a lived truth. They were forced to see that you hadn't simply passed through people's lives, you had left an imprint that couldn't be erased. This wasn't the kind of testimony that could be dismissed as bias. It wasn't about people liking you just because of who you are on the surface. It was about the way your character, your words, and your actions had directly influenced them. Some remembered how you encouraged them when they were down. Others recalled the wisdom you gave that shifted their perspective. Some spoke about your kindness, the way you treated them with dignity when no one else did, or how you showed consistency when life tested you. Each person's story became undeniable evidence of your impact. That's what left your enemies speechless. They weren't expecting depth. They were expecting dirt. They assumed people would have hidden grievances ready to spill. But instead, they heard testimonies of change, healing, and inspiration. And there's no way to argue against lived experience. You can dismiss rumors, you can deny gossip, but you cannot erase the way someone felt when another person changed their life for the better. Every answer they received confronted them with a reality they didn't want to face. Your presence had been powerful. Your life wasn't just a passing impression, it had roots in the hearts and minds of others. That's the kind of legacy that builds itself without announcements or grand gestures. It's the quiet but lasting evidence of someone who lives authentically. And while they stood frustrated, you stood validated, not because you defended yourself, but because others carried your story in them. They realized too late that the more they tried to interrogate your character, the more they exposed the influence of your integrity. You weren't just liked or respected, you were remembered. And that kind of imprint cannot be silenced, no matter how hard they tried. Number 13. Their questions turned into confessions of jealousy. What they didn't realize is that their questions carried weight, not the kind that made you look bad, but the kind that made them look exposed. Every time they brought your name up, it wasn't received as concern or casual conversation. People could hear the undertone. It wasn't curiosity, it was envy. It wasn't investigation, it was obsession. The way they repeatedly circled back to your life, your choices, and your name made it obvious to everyone that something deeper was driving them. And it wasn't truth. Instead of gathering dirt, what they gathered was suspicion. People began to notice the pattern. Why are you so focused on them? Why do you keep asking about someone who's clearly respected and admired? Their questions, instead of planting doubt about you, planted doubt about them. It became clear that this wasn't about uncovering anything hidden. It was about their need to validate their jealousy. And when jealousy drives the questioning, it always reveals itself. Their persistence became their confession. Every probe into your character, every attempt to fish for negativity, told on them. It showed how much space you occupy in their mind, how unsettled they are by your presence, and how desperate they are to find something that could justify their resentment. People saw it clearly. You weren't the one under a microscope, they were. The irony is that jealousy is one of the hardest things to hide. It bleeds through tone, body language, and choice of words. And in this case, it bled through their questioning. Instead of making you look guilty, it made them look small. Instead of exposing your flaws, it exposed their insecurity. People could see that the only reason someone would dig so hard into a life so respected is because they couldn't handle the light that shines from it. So in the end, their questioning backfired. What was supposed to cast a shadow on you only illuminated their envy. They didn't need to confess with words, their actions said it all. Every time they brought you up, it was less about you and more about the jealousy they couldn't contain. And now everyone knows it. Number 14. They wanted your name tarnished, but it got crowned. They went into it with one mission: to drag your name through the mud so no one would see you the same again. They imagined whispers turning into rumors, rumors turning into consensus, and consensus turning into the tarnished legacy they wanted for you. But here's where life's irony cut deepest. Their very attempts to stain your name only polished it brighter. The more they pushed negativity, the more people countered with respect, admiration, and truth. What was supposed to be mud became the gold that highlighted your crown. Every word spoken in your favor became a jewel, a testimony that couldn't be bought or fabricated. And it wasn't shallow compliments either. It was layered with weight. People weren't praising you out of pity or obligation. They were defending your character with stories, memories, and living proof of the kind of person you've consistently been. That kind of defense can't be staged. It's organic. It's undeniable. And every single time it surfaced, it turned into another jewel in the crown you never asked for, but earned. Meanwhile, those who wanted your downfall had to sit in silence while their plan backfired in the most humiliating way. The very audience they tried to poison became your witnesses, and worse, your defenders. They couldn't understand how the people they hoped would join in the slander became the same people who lifted your name higher. That reversal wasn't just failure, it was poetic justice. What burns them the most is that they unintentionally crowned you in public. They wanted to strip you of dignity, Yet they became the very hands that placed honor on your head. They wanted to make your name untouchable in the worst way, but they made it untouchable in the best way. Their scheme wasn't just defeated, it was inverted. Their attack became your coronation. And the truth is, that crown isn't fragile. It isn't based on popularity or surface-level admiration. It's built on trust, honor, and the undeniable testimony of lives you've impacted. That's why it's permanent. They wanted you buried, but instead, they became the shovel that dug up your treasure. And now, no matter how much they seethe, your name carries a weight they can't strip away. It carries a crown they accidentally placed on your head. At the end of the day, their schemes didn't just fail. They became the loudest proof of your strength. They wanted dirt, but they uncovered gold. They wanted whispers of scandal, but they unearthed testimonies of honor. They thought they could write your story, but the truth was already etched into the lives of those you touched. Every attempt to reduce you only revealed how deeply respected, trusted, and admired you truly are. What makes this even sweeter is that you never had to beg for defense or orchestrate a narrative. Your life already spoke for itself. And when the spotlight turned on, it wasn't you who looked desperate or obsessed. It was them. Their questions exposed their envy, their lies exposed their weakness, and their plots exposed their lack of power over your destiny. The most poetic part, the very hands that tried to strip you of dignity ended up crowning you with honor in front of the audience they hoped to poison. They wanted shame, but you walked away with glory. They wanted silence, but all they got was a chorus of praise too loud to be ignored. And now, they are left to sit with the reality that you weren't just liked. You were trusted, defended, and elevated by forces they could never manipulate. This isn't just vindication. It's a permanent reminder that no lie can bury the truth, and no smear can overshadow a legacy built on integrity. In trying to ruin you, they revealed you. In trying to break you, they crowned you. And that crown is something no enemy can ever take away. Family, if this word spoke to you, don't just keep it to yourself. Let it breathe. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss another message that lifts you higher. Like this video if it resonated with your spirit, and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your story, or even just a simple, "I receive this." And most importantly, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth and their crown. Together, we spread light, truth, and power further than any lie ever could. God